For almost 10 years, Oliver Tree kept telling everyone he was done. Every album was supposedly his last. Every tour was a goodbye. He faked his own ending so many times that his fans turned it into an inside joke and started calling him the boy who cried wolf. Then one Sunday morning in Brazil, the joke stopped being funny. Most people met Oliver Tree as a cartoon. The bowl cut, the enormous pants, the tiny scooter, the voice that always sounded mildly irritated with you. What the cartoon hid was a person with a much stranger and much sadder backstory than the costume ever let on. He was born Oliver Tree Nickel on June 29, 1993, in Santa Cruz, California. Here's the detail that explains a lot of what came later. Both of his parents worked as traveling circus performers, and as a small kid, Oliver didn't grow up in a house. He grew up in a motorhome that moved across the country from one show to the next. Before he ever performed anything himself, performing was simply the world he lived in. He was obsessive about music from the very beginning. By his own account, he was taking piano lessons at 3, writing songs at 4, and had a full album written by 6. That sounds like a tall tale, until you watch how relentlessly he backed it up for the next 2 decades. The work was never the problem. Everything around the work was. His teens got dark quickly. He's described falling into drug addiction as a teenager, dealing for a stretch, and getting pushed out of his own home when it strained things with his family.
Under the sun.
We had some wild days. There's a darker side to it that's pretty plagued in drug use.
Straight up addict. Like, my parents kicked me out of the house. I was literally using a different drug every day, selling hard drugs to survive, just living on my friends' couches.
The dread that hangs over so much of his music wasn't a marketing pose. He lived it before he ever sang about it. There was also a second world he was quietly building, and it had nothing to do with music. Oliver was a competitive kick scooter rider, and not as a punchline. He landed real sponsorships and competed across California as a kid, until a brutal crash in his late teens, the kind that breaks bones and dislocates joints, ended that path early. Sit with that picture for a second, because it's the whole man in miniature. A boy raised on the road by circus performers. A teenager who nearly wrecked his body, chasing a sport nobody respected. Every piece of the future Oliver Tree was already there. He just hadn't found the costume yet. Oliver's music career didn't start with a plan. It started as a way out. Around 2010, he began posting tracks online under the name Criff, making dubstep alongside other producers in the Santa Cruz scene. He's pointed to a Burning Man trip around 17 as the turning point, a stretch where addiction nearly swallowed him whole, and music became the thing that pulled him in a different direction. He's told versions of that Burning Man story himself, so treat the specifics as his account. The name Criff didn't last. He swapped it for his own middle name, Tree, and his sound drifted from heavy electronic music towards something softer. At 20, he signed to the London label R&S Records and put out an EP called Demons, and one of his earliest flickers of attention came from a cover of Radiohead's Karma Police. For an unknown grinding in obscurity, even a small wave was a foothold. Then he did the thing that would define the rest of his life. Right as it started working, he walked away. He went back to school, eventually landing at the California Institute of the Arts to study music technology around 2016. What he built there was the costume. This is where Oliver Tree the cartoon was born, and here's the part that unlocks the entire project. The bowl cut, the 80s clothes, the sneering antisocial character he'd come to call Turbo, all of it was armor. He talked openly about splitting himself into pieces. Oliver the artist, Oliver the producer, and Oliver the actual human, and using the ridiculous outer shell to say something real while hiding the vulnerable part underneath. The internet bit instantly. In October 2016, he featured on a song called When I'm Down, and it went viral, pulling in millions of streams. That single moment did what years of grinding hadn't. Atlantic Records came calling, and in 2017, Oliver signed. This is the machine he'd spent his whole career fighting from the inside. By his telling, the label questioned the bowl cut and the flared jeans almost immediately, and he told them in blunter words to back off. He won that fight, and the character stayed. But hold on to that friction, because the relationship between Oliver and the people selling Oliver never really stopped being a war. With a major label behind him, Oliver stopped doing things at a normal scale and started doing them at an unhinged one. This is where the legend actually gets built. In February 2018, He dropped his major label EP, Alien Boy, and the lead video wasn't just a video. He reportedly spent around 5 months learning to do freestyle monster truck jumps at a speedway in Paris, California, then performed the stunts himself. The same guy who used to break bones on scooters was doing it again on purpose, for art, and the song that mattered most to him on it, he made the simplest way possible, sitting down with a hometown friend named Casey Matson and a couple of other guys he'd grown up around. His first gold record, his first platinum record, just him and the dude down the street. The pattern held and got bigger. For the Hurt video, he flew to Ukraine to shoot it, and the song crossed 1 million plays in its first week. He played Coachella and Lollapalooza. He wasn't an internet curiosity anymore. He was a real touring act, and the face of it was a bowl cut. Then, in 2019, he ran the play he'd run for the rest of his career. He announced a farewell tour. The Goodbye Farewell Tour was framed as the end of his music so he could go make films. To a new fan, it sounded sincere and a little heartbreaking. It was actually the first loud public test of a trick that would eventually define him. He didn't retire, obviously. He announced his debut album, Ugly is Beautiful, and to promote it, he did the most Oliver thing conceivable. He designed and rode the world's largest functioning kick scooter and set an actual Guinness World Record. The kid who got destroyed riding scooters had turned the scooter into a monument. Now we have to slow down, because the thing Oliver Tree became most famous for is also the thing that makes his death so strange to talk about. He was, frankly, one of the great deadpan trolls of his era. Sit him across from a podcast host and he'd explain, without busting a smile, that an ancestor founded Joshua Tree, that he secretly ghost wrote some of the biggest hits of the century, that he'd lost a fortune to a famous con man. None of it was true. All of it was performance art, something to match the character he's created and presented himself as. He'd say the goal out loud, that the point was to confuse the listener, that the audience was the target. Half the internet could never quite tell where the bit ended. He pointed that same instinct at his own career. After Ugly is Beautiful, he announced he was retiring. Then he released another album, and another. He'd declare a project canceled, said he was finished, claimed his label had killed his music, and then the work would come out anyway. As recently as April 2026, he posted that his new album was scrapped and that he was leaving Atlantic. His fans built up an immunity to it. Online, asking whether Oliver had really retired marked you as a newcomer who'd fallen for the troll. They called him the boy who cried wolf over and over. Some loved the theater. Others got tired of the constant last album, last tour, beef with everyone routine. But here's the part that lands like a punch now. When one interviewer called the whole thing a shtick, Oliver pushed back. Hard. He insisted it genuinely wasn't a marketing trick, that you truly never know when an album is your last. I could die any moment, he said. He even joked he could have died on the way to the studio. Everyone in the room laughed. Underneath the trolling, real life kept happening. In 2019, Oliver started dating the alt-pop artist Melanie Martinez. They split in 2020, and while the breakup was amicable between them, some of her fans turned on him online, and he said the whole ordeal left him in a dark place. That heartbreak fed his next reinvention. He spent 6 months of the pandemic at his grandparents' ranch and came back with a country album. His grandfather had been a cowboy, he said, and it was part of his lineage. The 2022 record Cowboy Tears was, under the twang, a breakup album about giving men permission to cry. His own fan base revolted against the pivot at first. He pushed through it anyway, because by now, pushing through the audience's objection was the entire brand. The reinventions never stopped, and neither did the hits. In 2021, Life Goes On became the biggest song he'd ever made, top 10 at alternative radio, and his first entry on the Billboard Hot 100. And the story behind it is pure Oliver. He'd made it years earlier with his hometown friend Getter, and it almost never came out at all, nearly buried by a falling out over money before it ever saw daylight. Then, at the exact moment it broke him into the mainstream, he decided to kill off the character that got him there. He said Life Goes On was the last video he shot in the classic turbo look. The costume had become a cage. What came next was a run of new identities and new collaborators. Miss You, his 2022 song with German producer Robin Schulz, became a global hit and has since crossed hundreds of millions of views. For 2023's Alone in a Crowd, he invented an entire fictional fashion designer persona to inhabit. He kept reaching outward, working with names like KSI, Diplo, and David Guetta. Then he made the boldest version of his oldest move. In 2026, Oliver left Atlantic and released his fourth album, Love You Madly, Hate You Badly, independently on his own label. And the way he made it tells you everything about where his head was. By his own account, instead of burning a fortune in a Los Angeles studio he barely profited from, he recorded the whole thing himself, alone, in hotel rooms across 82 different countries. He used a cheap used interface that cost a couple $100s. He spent the studio budget on plane tickets and the marketing budget on more travel, recording at the Great Wall, at Machu Picchu, on all 7 continents. He talked about it like a man who'd finally redefined what success meant to him. Not followers, not commas in a bank account, but the freedom to say no. He lived out of one carry-on. He'd given away the 4-story house and the color-coded closet because he'd realized none of it had made him happy. For an artist whose entire mythology was built on faking his own exit, this was the rarest thing of all. A real new beginning. He launched what he billed as the world's first true world tour. A run designed to hit every continent. He was 32, independent, and starting over completely on his own terms. And this is where the story stops being a story and becomes news. On June 14th, 2026, Oliver was in Rio de Janeiro on that world tour. He'd played Sao Paulo on June 6th. In his final days, he was, by every account, fully alive in the way the cartoon never allowed. Filming himself playing football, hanging out with locals, posting from a studio just hours before the end. That morning, he boarded a Bell 206 helicopter. At around 9 a.m. local time, over a beachside neighborhood in Rio's West Zone, his aircraft collided in midair with a second helicopter. 6 people died.
Learned that 6 people have died after 2 helicopters collided mid-air in Brazil. Among the victims is a popular singer, Oliver Tree. It happened yesterday morning in Rio de Janeiro. Tree was coming off of a stop on his world tour. He was set to kick off the European leg of the tour in Portugal next month. Tree was in the helicopter with 4 other people.
Oliver was 32. The crash is still under investigation by Brazilian aviation authorities, so the cause itself remains unsettled, and it would be wrong to guess past what's confirmed. Now go back to the joke his fans spent a decade telling. The boy who cried wolf. The man who staged so many fake goodbyes that nobody could take an ending from him seriously. He'd sworn just weeks earlier that it was never a bit, that you really never do know which one is the last, that he could die at any moment. He was right. The troll who built a career out of fake exits never got to script the only one that counted. There was no twist coming after it. His body was brought home to California. A message on his accounts said only that Oliver could finally rest. What makes this so heavy isn't only that he was young, though he was. It's the shape of it. He spent his whole career teaching the world not to believe his goodbyes, and he got so good at it that the real one barely felt possible. He'd planned for it anyway, in his own odd way. He said more than once that when he died, his family wouldn't see a penny beyond getting his kids through college.
When I pass, my family, no one's gonna get a penny. If I have a wife or kids or anything, not getting a f***ing penny. I'll get my kids through college. That's the agreement, but they're not gonna be a silver spoon. They're taken care of because my dad worked on some stuff in the 2000s. When I die, all the money's gonna go back to artists. So I've set up a foundation. It's called Dr. Oliver Trees.
Because he never believed the money was his to begin with. He set up a foundation to send all of it back to artists. One he called, with total sincerity, Dr. Oliver Trees Art Grants for Baby Geniuses. In his telling, none of his work was ever really his. The ideas were just floating out there, and he happened to be the guy awake at 4 a.m. to catch them. If you had told the internet a year ago that Oliver Tree had retired, nobody would have believed you. That's the tragedy of it. Rest easy, Oliver.